It was one of those summer evenings that felt like a movie. The grill was sizzling, kids were laughing, and soft country music played in the background. Mom had strung fairy lights across the porch for their anniversary party, and the whole Turner family had shown up. Everyone looked happy for once. I remember thinking maybe things were finally normal again. I was holding a plate of ribs, talking with my cousin near the fire pit, when Grayson's voice cut through the noise. He slammed his glass so hard the table shook, and the sound of it stopped every conversation at once. "This house is mine now," he shouted. "Pack your bags." For a moment, nobody moved. The crickets outside went quiet, and I swear I could hear my heart pounding. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's old friend dropped his fork. The cousin stopped running. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I turned to Grayson, waiting for him to laugh and say it was a joke. But he didn't. His face was cold, proud even. "You heard me," he said. "This place belongs to me now. I'm taking over." I looked at him like he was someone I didn't know. This was my brother, the same guy who taught me how to ride a bike, who used to sneak out with me to fish at the lake. I thought maybe he was drunk. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "You can't just." He cut me off. "I can, and I already did," he said. "The will was updated months ago. Mom and Dad left everything to me." Mom tried to speak, but her voice broke. "Grayson, that's not what we—" He raised his hand, silencing her. "It's done. You signed it. Remember?" Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't understand what he meant, but I could tell she did. Something in her face crumbled. She looked small, guilty even. I felt my chest tighten. "You're lying," I said. "Why would they cut me out? I've been the one here, taking care of them, taking care of this house." Grayson just shrugged. "Guess they trusted the one who actually knows how to handle money," he said, smirking. A few people got up from their seats, whispering. It felt wrong to be watching, but no one could look away. Mom reached out for him, her voice trembling. "Grayson, please don't do this here." He pulled back. "It's better everyone knows the truth," he said. "I'm the owner now, and I'm not letting anyone live here rent-free." The words hit me harder than a punch. Mom's face went pale, and I felt my hands shaking. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to wake up and find it wasn't real. But it was. That night, the laughter and the lights didn't matter anymore. The house that had always felt warm suddenly felt like a stranger's place. Grayson had taken more than a home. He'd taken the trust we'd built our lives on. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. 6 months before that night, life in Cedar Creek was quiet. The farmhouse sat on the edge of a long dirt road, surrounded by wheat fields that swayed with the wind. I spent most of my days fixing cars at the small repair shop in town, then came home to help Mom and Dad with whatever they needed. Dad's back wasn't what it used to be, and Mom's hands shook whenever she tried to hold a cup of tea. Still, they smiled through it, and I did what I could to keep things running. Most evenings were simple. I'd make dinner, and we'd sit together at the old wooden table, talking about small things, the weather, the neighbors, the price of gas. Mom always said the same thing before bed. Family sticks together no matter what. I believed her. We all did. Grayson, my older brother, was different. He had left Cedar Creek years ago for Chicago. He wore suits now, drove a new car, and spoke like he was always in a rush. He'd call every few weeks, his voice polite but distant. "How's everyone doing out there?" he'd ask. He never stayed on the phone long. Mom always defended him. "He's busy, Eli," she'd say. "He's got a lot on his plate." Then one day, he started calling more often. At first, I was happy to hear from him. He said he wanted to visit and spend more time with the family. I told Mom, and her eyes lit up. "See," she said. "Family always finds its way home." When Grayson came, he looked out of place, standing in his city clothes, looking around like the house was smaller than he remembered. He hugged Mom and Dad, shook my hand, and smiled like everything was fine. But something felt different. He asked too many questions about the property, the bills, even the insurance. He said he wanted to help with the paperwork, so Mom and Dad wouldn't have to worry. I didn't think much of it then. He was the older one, the one who went to college, the one Dad always said was born for big things. When Grayson pulled out some folders and papers, I figured it was just boring legal stuff. He said, "It's just some estate updates. Standard stuff. You know how the world works these days." Mom looked uncertain, but Dad trusted him. "If Grayson says it's good, Dad said." I remember standing by the sink, drying dishes, thinking how nice it was to see them all working together. But over the next few weeks, things started to feel strange. Grayson came back again and again, always with new papers, new forms for them to sign. He'd show up without warning, flashing that same easy smile. I'd ask what it was for, and he'd say, "Just keeping things in order." One night, I caught Mom reading one of the documents at the table. Her brow was furrowed, her lips moving as she whispered through the lines. When I asked what it was, she quickly folded it and said, "Just something Grayson asked me to look over." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I felt uneasy, but I told myself not to worry. Grayson was family. Family sticks together. I wanted to believe that more than anything. What I didn't know then was that my trust, the one thing I thought would hold us together, was the very thing he would use to break us apart. It was early spring when Grayson showed up again, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought a woman with him, tall, elegant, and quiet. "This is Clara," he said, his arm around her shoulder. "My fiancée." Mom's face lit up right away. She hugged Clara and started asking about wedding plans before the poor woman even sat down. Clara smiled politely, but there was something distant in her eyes. She looked around the house as if she was appraising it, not visiting it. Her gaze lingered on the old staircase, the wooden beams, the wide windows that looked out over the fields. "This place is beautiful," she said softly. "With a little work, it could fetch a fortune." Mom laughed, thinking it was a compliment, but I caught the tone. Clara didn't sound impressed, she sounded calculating. I brushed it off. Maybe she was just making small talk, I told myself. But the way Grayson looked at her, with a proud little smirk, made my stomach twist. That weekend, Grayson acted like he was suddenly interested in everything about the property. He spent hours in Dad's study, going over old files and land deeds. I could hear his voice through the thin walls. "You have to think ahead, Dad," he said one night. "You can't leave everything unorganized. If something happens, the taxes alone could destroy the family." Dad's tone was tired but trusting. "I don't know much about all that paperwork," he said. "You're better at it than I ever was." I was walking past the room when I heard Grayson say something that made me stop. "I just want to make sure everything's secure," he said. "It's about being responsible." His voice was calm, careful. The kind of voice he used when he wanted people to agree with him. Later that night, I found Dad sitting in the living room, staring at the old photo of him and Mom on their wedding day. His shoulders were slumped, and his hands were shaking slightly. "You okay, Dad?" I asked. He looked up and smiled, but it was weak. "Your brother's right," he said. "He knows what he's doing. He just wants to help us." I nodded, trying to believe it. Grayson was the successful one, after all. But something in Dad's eyes made me uneasy. He wasn't convinced either. The next few days, Grayson and Clara stayed busy. Papers came out on the dining table. Forms, folders, envelopes. Clara helped organize everything, saying things like, "You'll thank us later, Helen. This will make everything easier when the time comes." Mom nodded, though I could see she didn't understand half of it. By the time they left, a stack of documents sat neatly in Dad's study. All signed. All notarized. I didn't know what they were for, and no one explained. After they drove off, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Mom went about cleaning the dishes, humming softly, but her voice cracked once or twice. I found Dad outside, sitting on the porch steps, rubbing his hands together. Something had shifted. I couldn't see it yet, but I could feel it. Grayson had planted something in this house. Not just papers and promises, but doubt. And like a seed buried deep, it had already started to grow. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I was in the garage changing a tire when I heard Mom scream from inside the house. I dropped everything and ran. Dad was lying on the kitchen floor, his coffee spilled beside him, his face pale and still. Mom was shaking his shoulders, begging him to wake up. But he didn't. The ambulance came fast, but there was nothing they could do. They said it was a stroke, quick and unexpected. One moment he was here, the next he was gone. The days that followed were a blur. The house filled with neighbors, casseroles, and quiet prayers. I did everything, called relatives, made arrangements, tried to keep Mom from falling apart. Grayson came 2 days later, dressed in black, saying all the right words. He was a great man, he said to everyone. But when he hugged me, I could feel nothing behind it. 2 weeks after the funeral, we were called to a lawyer's office in town. It was time to read Dad's will. I didn't expect surprises. Dad always said the house would stay in the family. I thought he'd split things evenly between us. Mom sat beside me, holding a tissue in her lap. Grayson sat across from us, looking calm, confident. The lawyer opened a folder and began to read. His voice was steady, but my hands started to shake as soon as I heard the words. The entire estate, the farmhouse, the land, Dad's savings, was left to Grayson Turner. Nothing was mentioned for me. Not even a line. Mom gasped. "That can't be right," she said. "There must be a mistake." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "These are the most recent documents," he said. "Signed and notarized about 3 months ago." I stared at Grayson. He didn't look surprised at all. He sat there, calm as ever, hands folded in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was smooth. "Dad wanted things simple," he said. "He thought it was easier this way." Mom turned to him, her face pale. "But I remember signing something you brought over," she whispered. "You said it was insurance papers." Grayson smiled slightly. "It's all legal, Mom. Don't worry about it." I couldn't breathe. I wanted to shout, to call him out right there, but Mom looked so fragile that I stayed quiet. The lawyer handed over the final papers, and just like that, everything changed. The home I grew up in, the land Dad worked his whole life for, all of it now belonged to my brother. After that day, Mom barely spoke. She sat by the window most evenings, staring out at the fields. Her health started to fail, the stress weighing her down. I tried to comfort her, to remind her that we still had each other. But deep inside, I felt trapped, living in a house that no longer felt like ours. Grayson called once, saying he'd work something out and give me a fair share later. I waited, holding on to that promise because it was all I had left. But the weeks passed and nothing came. No check, no visit, not even a phone call. Every creak in the old farmhouse started to feel like a reminder. Dad's chair sat empty. The air felt colder. And the truth settled in. My own brother had taken everything, not because he needed it, but because he could. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, a way to remember Dad and try to feel normal again. I spent the morning cleaning the small dining room, arranging flowers, and making sure Mom looked presentable. She was nervous, but I told her everything would be fine. I had a plan. I was going to pull Grayson aside, speak to him privately, and demand answers. I wanted to keep the confrontation away from everyone else, but I wasn't sure if I could hold my anger in check. Guests began arriving, filling the house with chatter and laughter that felt strange and hollow without Dad. Cousins wandered the rooms, aunts and uncles hugged Mom, and I moved among them quietly, keeping an eye on Grayson. He stood near the fireplace, Clara at his side, sipping wine and smiling politely at everyone. He seemed completely at ease, like he owned not just the house, but the entire world. I finally took a deep breath and moved toward him, ready to speak. But before I could get a word out, Grayson raised his hand and called for attention. The room fell silent. I watched as he cleared his throat, his smirk faint but unmistakable. Then he said words that made the air in my chest tighten. "This house is mine now. You and Mom need to move out." The room erupted into shocked murmurs. I saw Mom's face pale, her hand flying to her chest, and before I could reach her, she collapsed. People rushed to help her, and Clara simply smiled, her arms crossed, watching the chaos with amusement. I felt something inside me snap. I wanted to scream, to punch, to tear everything apart. My voice finally broke through the crowd. "How could you do this, Grayson? Mom, the house, everything, it's ours." I shouted, my hands shaking, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. Grayson didn't flinch. He just looked at me calmly, the same smirk still on his face, and said, "It's all legal. There's nothing you can do." Tears burned my eyes. I felt humiliated in front of family and friends, powerless because every move I could make was meaningless under the law. My fists clenched, then unclenched, as I realized that this wasn't just about money or property. It was about him proving that he could hurt us and get away with it. By the end of the evening, I was exhausted and defeated. Mom sat quietly on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, still pale from the fainting spell. I helped her pack a few essential belongings into a couple of bags. She didn't complain. She just let me do it, her eyes distant and sad. We left the farmhouse behind that night, walking to a small, modest apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was safe, and it was ours for now. I looked back as we carried the last box into the car. The farmhouse stood dark and empty behind us, its windows like eyes staring coldly at what used to be our home. As we drove away, the weight of what had happened settled on me. Grayson had won this round, but I swore to myself that this wasn't the end. He could take the house, but he hadn't broken me yet. Not completely. Not yet. The days after we moved into the apartment were heavy. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with anger, guilt, and helplessness. Every creak of the old building, every distant car horn, reminded me of what we had lost. Mom's soft coughing and occasional murmurs from the other room kept me on edge. She wasn't just grieving, she was fading. One evening, I found her sitting on the small couch, her hands trembling over a cup of tea. "Eli," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm sorry. I signed the wrong papers. I thought I was helping." My chest tightened. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but I couldn't stop the guilt from gnawing at me. She had trusted her own son, and that trust had been used against us. Meanwhile, Grayson had moved quickly. I heard from a neighbor that the farmhouse was sold to a developer. He planned to tear it down and build luxury cabins where our childhood memories once lived. The thought made my stomach churn. Places where Dad had worked, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays, would soon be unrecognizable. I felt powerless, knowing that our family's history could be wiped away so easily. One late afternoon, I decided I had to see the farmhouse one last time. Driving up the old gravel driveway, I felt my chest tighten. The land looked the same at first, but the signs of change were there. The grass was overgrown in places, the old swing set in the backyard was broken and rusted, leaning dangerously to one side. I could still picture Dad pushing me on it, laughing, his big hands steady on the ropes. I walked through the front door, which groaned under my weight. Inside, everything was eerily silent. Dad's tools, once neatly organized in the corner, sat rusting and forgotten. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air. I touched the banister, feeling the smoothness of years of use, and my heart ached. This was more than a house. It was a lifetime of memories being stripped away. I sank into a chair in the living room, letting the quiet surround me. I whispered a promise to my father's memory, my voice breaking. "I won't let this go. I'll make this right. I swear it." The anger and grief that had weighed me down began to harden into something else, determination. It was no longer just about mourning what we lost. It was about reclaiming justice in whatever way I could. Walking out of the farmhouse for the last time, I felt a strange clarity. The swing set, the broken tools, the empty rooms, they weren't just reminders of what Grayson had taken. They were fuel. Fuel for a plan, for a slow, careful response. Revenge didn't feel cruel. It felt necessary. I would bide my time, wait for the right moment, and make sure that Grayson understood the cost of betraying his own family. As I drove back to the apartment, the sun dipping behind the trees, I felt the first solid spark of resolve. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The apartment felt small and quiet, but that quiet became my ally. Every night, after helping Mom with her medicine and settling her into bed, I would sit at the kitchen table with a pile of papers, a laptop, and a fading lamp. I needed answers, and slowly, methodically, I began to study property laws and estate transfers. The legal language was dense and boring at first, but I pushed through. Every paragraph, every clause became a tool, a way to fight back. Weeks passed, and patterns started to emerge. Something didn't add up with the documents Grayson had used to take the farmhouse. I checked and rechecked every signature, every date, every notarization. That's when I noticed it. Mom's signature on one crucial document didn't match the others. It was faintly different, slightly off, as though someone had rushed it or copied it. My stomach tightened. If I was right, Grayson had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. I knew I needed advice from someone I could trust. That's when I remembered Marvin Hale, a retired attorney who had known Dad for years. I hesitated at first, not wanting to drag anyone into this, but I drove to his small office on the edge of town. Marvin had a sharp gaze and a gentle way of speaking. I laid out the papers, the documents, and my suspicions. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. After hours of study, he finally said, "Eli, this looks suspicious. That signature, it doesn't look like your mother's." A surge of hope and cold determination ran through me. For the first time since Dad's death and Grayson's betrayal, I felt like I had a weapon in my hand. But I had to be careful. Mom's health was fragile, and I didn't want her to suffer more than she already had. She didn't know what I was doing, and I intended to keep it that way until the right moment. I started gathering evidence quietly. Old letters from Dad, bank records showing transactions, and even a notarized statement from Mrs. Reynolds, a family friend who had been present during some of the signing, became part of my plan. Each piece was a thread I could use to unravel Grayson's scheme. I organized them carefully, making copies, highlighting discrepancies, and writing notes for myself. Late nights became my routine. The apartment was dark except for the dim light over the kitchen table. I drank black coffee, sometimes forgetting to eat. My mind focused entirely on the case I was building. Every error I discovered, every overlooked detail, made me more determined. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could fight back in a way Grayson would never see coming. As the weeks went by, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. The helplessness, the grief, the anger, it transformed into a methodical, calculated energy. For the first time since the betrayal, I knew the next moves, and I felt a cold satisfaction in knowing that I could protect Mom, honor Dad, and finally set things right. I filed the legal challenge quietly, making sure no one knew what I was doing. Every detail had to be perfect. I couldn't risk mistakes or leaks. Grayson was clever, and one slip could ruin everything. Weeks turned into months, filled with quiet preparation, careful filings, and waiting. The apartment became a small war room, with papers stacked neatly, emails organized, and every piece of evidence double-checked. Then one morning the phone rang. The voice on the other end was from the courthouse. Grayson and Clara had been officially served with summons for fraudulent inheritance transfer. I didn't celebrate out loud. I simply exhaled and put the phone down. The first step had been taken, and the wheels were turning. The effects were immediate. Clara, who had always seemed so composed, began to panic. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she left him, packing her things and moving out of town. Grayson, once confident and untouchable, started receiving cold calls from his law firm. They were dropping him, unwilling to be tied to the scandal. Slowly, silently, I watched the walls he had built around himself start to crumble. Court dates came and went. Each session revealed more of the truth. I sat quietly, taking notes, letting the lawyers do the talking. Evidence of his manipulation, his constant pressure on Dad, and the forgery of Mom's signature were laid bare. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted with every piece of proof presented. Grayson, once arrogant and unshakable, grew tense, sweating under the scrutiny. I kept my distance from him, observing silently as his empire of lies began to unravel. He no longer had the smug confidence he used to carry. People who had once supported him began to question his actions. The truth, which had been buried under charm and manipulation, now shone clearly for everyone to see. Finally, the day came when the judge delivered the verdict. I held my breath, clutching Mom's hand lightly. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully and then spoke. The will was overturned. The property, the farmhouse, and all assets involved were returned to Mom's name. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. Then a wave of relief and disbelief washed over me. Mom's face lit up with tears, a mix of relief, gratitude, and disbelief. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Eli, thank you for not giving up." I felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from revenge itself, but from seeing justice served. Grayson left the courtroom that day a broken man. His plans, his control, and his sense of superiority had been stripped away. The house, the land, and our family's legacy were safe once more. I didn't gloat or speak to him. I simply watched, knowing that the truth had won, and that our family could begin to heal. That night, I sat in the living room with Mom, the house finally ours again. The weight that had pressed on us for months began to lift. The fight had been long and painful, but justice finally had come. Grayson's world continued to crumble after the court's decision. His law firm had let him go, and without Clara by his side, he looked smaller somehow, the arrogance gone, replaced by desperation. Word spread quickly in Cedar Creek and the surrounding towns. People who had once admired him now whispered about his downfall. His reputation, built over years of manipulation and charm, was gone almost overnight. One evening, he showed up at the apartment. His eyes were hard, but the usual confidence was missing. "Eli," he spat, "you've ruined everything. Look at me. Look at what's left of my life." I didn't rise from the chair I was sitting in. I just looked at him, calm and steady. "You did that yourself," I said softly. His jaw tightened, but there was nothing he could say that would change the truth. He stormed out shortly after, slamming the door behind him. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. His anger, his frustration, and his failure were all of his own making. Watching him walk away, powerless despite his fury, brought a quiet sense of closure. I knew he would not return to Cedar Creek. This town, our home, and our family's legacy were safe, and that was all that mattered. Weeks later, Helen passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her frail hands rested on the quilt she had loved for years. I held her hand as she whispered, "It's safe now, the house our home." tears filled my eyes, but I also felt relief. She left knowing that the family she had worked so hard to protect could finally rest easy. Her passing was sad, but it was peaceful, a quiet ending to a life that had endured so much. After the funeral, I returned to the farmhouse. Walking through the rooms, memories hit me: Dad's study, the kitchen where Mom had baked countless pies, the living room where we had gathered as a family. I began restoring the home, slowly and carefully. Each room brought a mix of grief and comfort. I placed Mom and Dad's photos back on the mantel, arranged their favorite chairs, and dusted off old keepsakes. Every small act was a way of reclaiming what had been stolen and honoring the life my parents had built. Grayson didn't return. I heard later that he had driven out of Cedar Creek for good, leaving behind the town, the house, and everything he had tried to control. He didn't say goodbye, and I didn't expect him to. What mattered was that he was gone, and the farmhouse, our home, was finally ours again. As I stood in the doorway one evening, the sun casting a warm glow across the fields, I felt a quiet strength. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle, it had all led to this. The house was safe, the memories preserved, and our family's story intact. Cedar Creek felt alive again, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The reckoning had come, and justice, though slow, had been served. Grayson's fury, his losses, and his departure marked the end of one chapter, while the farmhouse, filled with the legacy of my parents, became the beginning of another, one built on love, memory, and resilience. Months passed, and life at the farmhouse settled into a new rhythm. I spent mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the fields my family had cared for generations. The air smelled of fresh grass and morning dew, and for the first time in years, the silence felt comforting rather than empty. The house stood tall and solid, its walls echoing memories of laughter, arguments, and quiet family moments. Revenge had brought justice, but it hadn't healed the emptiness completely. I still missed the brother I had once known. There were times I caught myself thinking about the moments Grayson and I shared as kids, playing in the fields, helping Dad with the old tractor, laughing at stupid jokes. Those memories hurt now, sharp reminders of what had been lost, but I carried them with me, a bittersweet part of my life. I decided to turn the farmhouse into something that mattered, a way to honor Mom and Dad. I began converting rooms into spaces for children who had nowhere else to go. Kids from troubled homes or foster situations came to stay for a week, a month, or longer. I cooked meals in the same kitchen Mom had loved, and the living room, once filled with tension, now rang with laughter and playful shouts. The walls that had witnessed betrayal now witnessed joy. It became a place where broken pieces could be mended, a home that truly mattered. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox. I recognized the handwriting immediately: Grayson. I hesitated before opening it, expecting some bitter taunt or final attempt at manipulation. Instead, inside was a single document, a deed to the last piece of family land he had still owned. No apology, no explanation, nothing but the paper transferring the land back. I felt a strange mix of surprise and faint amusement. I held the deed, thinking about everything that had happened, the fight, the betrayal, and the court battles. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. Maybe some lessons take longer to learn, I whispered to myself. I didn't feel the need to respond to him. The gesture, silent as it was, closed one more door on the past while leaving the path ahead open. Days turned into weeks, and the farmhouse grew more alive with the energy of the children who stayed. I watched them run through the fields, play under the old oak tree, and explore the barn where Dad had stored his tools. Each laugh, each small adventure reminded me of why I had fought so hard. Not for revenge alone, but for family, for legacy, for the chance to make something better out of the pain. As the sun set one evening, painting the fields golden and orange, I stood on the porch again, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The house that had been torn apart by greed and betrayal now hummed with life and hope. The farmhouse was no longer just a building. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place of healing. And in that stillness, I finally felt that the fight, the loss, and the struggle had led to something worth protecting. The family legacy had survived, not through wealth or property, but through love, care, and the life it now nurtured.